Welcome to part two, kind of what if Germany was divided by after World War II. So the first part, we looked at Alternative History Hub's solution, where he looked at the Morgenthau Plan. I read a little bit more into that, and it looks like the Morgenthau Plan was sort of dead on arrival. Internally, it was discussed, and although Churchill had mentioned that he was looking forward to turning Germany into an agricultural state, this plan was actually leaked to the German public and was propagandized to sort of make them fight on more. By the time it was made public in the US and everything like this, it was sort of tossed away. And Roosevelt said he had never heard of it, which seemed to be a bit of a lie. But now we're going to be looking at his plan, Roosevelt's plan. And this is going to be by not Alternative History Hub, our friend Whatifalthist. I really hope demographics comes up in this video by some manner, because it always comes up in his videos. So I have a feeling this one is going to be somehow present in this video. I think that the issue with the Morgenthau Plan too, just to sort of recap on that one, it's going to lead to Soviet influence, and with Germany being so deindustrialized and having just an insane amount of deaths happening, people are either going to go far left or far right. I hypothesize that they would go far left because the Soviet Union, they would really take advantage of this and to be anti-Western and to actually provide better conditions for the German people, therefore wanting to move Germany more to the left overall. So that was a long enough intro. Let's get right into what if Germany was divided after World War II by Whatifalthist.
Germany's been divided for most of its history. From the 13th century until 1870.
We forget that too. Actually, Germany's quite a new nation. Only reunited by Bismarck after the Franco-Prussian War.
71, Germany was a fragmentary patch of squabbling states. The nations surrounding Germany often promulgated this, crushing any state that showed potential possibility of unifying the country. This was since a united Germany would dominate Europe, and its attempt to do so was the preeminent struggle of the early 20th century. In real terms, in our world, the German genie's never been put back into the bottle. In the 21st century, a united Germany still dominates the European continent, albeit peacefully. However, this didn't necessarily have to happen. FDR, the American president during the Second World War, wanted to bring Germany back to the way it was before 1871.
Interesting. And in the last video, by the way, I said this part was Hamburg. Hamburg, sorry, is a very small Bundesland. It's actually incorrect. So he would want to do it by Sachsen, Hessen, Bavaria, Prussia, and Hanover. Okay, and then the international zone. But then who would control the international zone? So that would be split between the victorious powers. Would that eventually be incorporated into Hanover or Hessen? Okay, let's find out.
Or by dividing it into a series of small states. That didn't happen, but what if it did? What if Germany was actually divided into 6 different states after the Second World War? How would that have affected borders, culture, demographics, and the like today? That's the question.
Hey, it's our word. That's our word. I want to know what ship that is, too.
One of the eras of history that I find really interesting that you rarely hear people talk about is ancient South America.
Yeah, Okay, hold up. Yep, that's definitely an ad. Okay. Sorry, let's get back to the video here. All right, let's go for
our YouTube channel on the Alternate History. Before we start, this video is a collaboration with Alternate History Hub, another YouTube channel in the Alternate History space. We're doing a video series where he'll talk about the Morgenthau Plan, which involves splitting Germany into 3 parts and then deindustrializing it. Where I'll be focusing on the Roosevelt Plan, or the one to split Germany into 6 different states. You should check out his video in the link in the description after watching this. It's pretty easy to start this alternate history. There's merely a shift in negotiations among the Allied powers that said that Germany should be divided even further. Maybe news of the Holocaust gets out of the general public earlier in the war, and so there's more public pressure to punish Germany for their actions. It doesn't matter a tremendous deal. When you look at Roosevelt's plan to divide Germany, it boils down to effectively redrawing the borders, the previous ducal divisions inside Germany of places like Bavaria, Hanover, Prussia, or Austria. One of the main truths about this division of Germany was that it would be de facto divided between Russian and American spheres of influence.
Interesting. So it looks like Austria then is going to be firmly to the west, because as I brought up in the last video, Austria was divided until the late 50s, where they regained full independence, and a part of their independence was that they would never, ever, 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 ever join Germany, and they would be a permanently neutral state. which is why to this day they're still not in NATO. And Vienna is often a place of where conferences are held for peace negotiations and whatnot. So it looks like the East is still going to the Soviets. So, and maybe he'll clarify this up, but then the Soviets assumably would accept this Roosevelt plan. So they would have two states then. It's Saxony and Prussia. Okay, let's go.
Both armies would realistically be parked in militarily occupying German soil and viewing the other side as a threat to their entire civilization, would thus not be willing to give an inch. Although this Germany might nominally be called Saxony, Hesse, or the like, in real terms it would be divided between an American and Russian sector. This would be the overriding reality in the situation. Yep. On the Soviet side, they'd love the division of Germany since it would allow them to control it more effectively and divide and rule. An important thing to consider here is that the western border of Poland would never have been moved west to the Oder River. In our timeline, the Russians wanted more of a buffer and so hacked off the eastern third of Poland, which they in turn compensated the Poles with by taking a significant portion of eastern Germany. This resulted in shuffling millions of people, whether Poles, Ukrainians, Russians, and Germans, hundreds of miles west to fit into the new borders. In the FDR plan, Russia still hacks off eastern Poland, but the Germans keep eastern Germany. This would actually make eastern Germany more powerful vis-a-vis western Germany than it was in our world, but also be a public relations scandal for the Soviet Union, who basically just raped Poland another time while the Poles had fought on their side during World War II. However, let's not beat around the bush here. We're talking about Stalinist Russia, and so public relations don't matter at all.
The other thing too is that that's quite fascinating. So I guess then the expulsion of Germans, you got to think about how this would have affected Germany to this day, and how that sort of relations would have taken place within the Warsaw Pact, or the Comintern, if you will, where Poland is once again sort of in a weakened position, with Germany being more dominant than it. Interesting.
Part of the area that Poland swallowed up, namely Silesia, was some of the most industrialized and historically pivotal parts of the German nation. This would be the equivalent of if Texas was swallowed up by Mexico and all the ethnic Americans were forced out. The Soviets ruled like a traditional empire, and that they were a tool for the dominant ethnic group, the Russians, to extract resources and maintain cultural imperialism from the provinces, which we see in the Soviet policy in Germany, which involved deindustrialization and some of the most active political repression ever seen in history. Meanwhile, the US was an empire built off bribes and concessions in order to build a willing coalition. The US thus invested large amounts in its conquests, gave them preferential trade deals, and allowed them political independence. The American part of Germany, meanwhile, would be terrified of the
Right, and I don't want to comment on the differences between how to build an empire, I suppose, but one of those definitely sounds more fair than the other, but I digress.
Soviets. Which leads us to the main problem with this alternate history, in that the reason that the Americans didn't support policies that would weaken, impoverish, or divide Germany was that the Soviets had 3-1 numerical superiority, and thus the Americans wanted to pull on their European allies as hard as possible so they wouldn't lose World War III. We could have eventually seen a creation of a sort of German Union or Confederacy, given that between the Holy Roman Empire, Confederacy of the Rhine, and the German Union, they've been a constant. Also, that the post-World War II era has been one of multinational organizations, whether the United Nations, European Union, or the like. An American organized German federation would form out of, say, Bonn. Similarly, if the U.S. was worried
I think they wouldn't have picked Bonn. They probably would have picked Frankfurt or something like this. Just assumably, but
enough by German military force to divide Germany into 6, they probably wouldn't allow a centralized German military command, which they would try to subsume into the broader NATO organization under American command. The creation of these regional groupings would result in a promulgation of local identities, in which the nations would try to create social cohesion by pushing Bavarian, Hessian, or other types of culture. This sort of reminds me of Canada, in which a country that culturally has no right to exist continually finds small reasons like nationalized healthcare, poutine, hockey, and the like to form a national identity. The main
Go check out my video on how Canada will fall by Whatifalthist. What kind of a statement was like that Canada has no reason to exist and we just talk about hockey? There's much more to the Canadian national identity. I was not expecting a Canada jab in there. There's much more to the Canadian identity. By the way, I'm a Canadian. Much more to the Canadian national identity than hockey, poutine, and national healthcare. But I'm not going to get into Canadian identity in the what if Germany was divided after World War II video, but go check out my other video on how Canada will fall and some of my issues with our friend Whatifalthist, but I digress.
An influence inside Europe from this divided Germany would be to make France significantly more powerful. We would effectively see a return to the world of the 18th century, in which a divided Germany allowed France to be the most powerful nation in peninsular Europe.
Why?
France would use the weakening of Germany to create a sphere of influence in Italy, Benelux, and the Rhineland states in Germany. The US would act through France to maintain its control over Europe. This would mean that the European Union would never exist.
What? Okay, whoa. Did I not catch something there? So he's saying that France would be allowed to, but then Belgium and Netherlands, they're still their own independent states here. And we haven't even talked about Italy, so I'm just going to leave Italy out of that. But then why would he assume that France would be able to go on and dominate these countries? What? Why? That's through what exactly? And, okay, maybe the EU wouldn't form, sure, but to say that France would just be able to dominate these countries, that seems a little far-fetched to me. Especially since, as he said, the West Germans, although they're not centralized, they are still on the side here, and they would arguably wield, they would still have power in some method, right? So unless I missed something there from being taken back from his Canada thing, that doesn't quite make sense to me at all. I mean, I would think that these countries would not allow, and sure, maybe within the German states, reasonable, right? So maybe around, sort of the Saarland and Hessen and whatever, these areas could have more influence from the French, particularly because they're bordered with them. And if the U.S. wants to pull back, sure, I believe that. But Belgium and Netherlands, I don't quite understand that.
Europe. This would mean that the European Union would never exist. The European Union is fundamentally built off the alliance between France and Germany, who form such a bizarre coalition that they're able to disarm the rest of Europe. This is because...
Again, pan-European idealism. This was actually post-World War II and pre-World War II as well. Sort of the United States of Europe. These ideas, they weren't just Germany and France that the EU was created. These ideas did exist. And maybe with a fractional Germany divided between Hanover, Hessen, and Bayern, then they would actually be pushing more for unity, right? I would think rather than less unity. But okay, I mean, I don't think that the EU would never exist. Okay, I'll say that maybe not the EU wouldn't exist, but I would imagine that there would still be some sort of institution that would exist, particularly because you have to think of the influence of Britain as well, and the US, albeit even though I said they'll be pulling out, to really fight against the Soviets, right? That's the key thing, is keep the Russians out.
Because, like all of European history, if a single country was to become too powerful inside Europe, the whole continent would team up against them so that country wouldn't become so powerful as to only push its interests. The British would be livid at the French for being so powerful, and so would try to construct a coalition of Scandinavia and North Germany, possibly including countries in southern Europe against the French. This means that a united Europe would never have formed in this timeline. A major effect of the European Union was to allow peripheral states inside Europe like Spain and Ireland large markets and stable institutions that allowed them to move to wealthy first world status. In a continent divided between a French sphere of influence and the rest, that never would have occurred. Ireland would probably still become wealthy due to being part of the Anglosphere and American influence, but Mediterranean Europe and countries like Spain, Portugal, Italy would be significantly poorer.
Spain's an interesting example, though, because Spain, as you may know, they were in this. So even in this timeline, they're still a fascist power. So it's the same timeline as us. And Franco was very isolated after the World War because he had picked really neither sides. He was still a fascist dictator, so he obviously had no friends in the West, and he wasn't. He certainly was incredibly anti-communist, so he had no friends in the East either. But Portugal, I mean, quite a Western-aligned nation. Italy, okay, fair enough. But then even Greece too. Okay, all right. Oh, let's go with it. I just want to rehear what he said. Hold on.
The effect of the European Union was to allow peripheral states inside Europe like Spain and Ireland large markets and stable institutions that allowed them to move to wealthy first world status. In a continent divided between a French sphere of influence and the rest, that never would have occurred. Ireland would probably still become wealthy due to being part of the Anglosphere and American influence, but Mediterranean Europe and countries like Spain, Portugal, Italy would be significantly poorer.
But even then, if we're to think that free trade is going to take on as much as it had in the 20th century, then it's not exclusively the EU that made these countries more rich. Spain, again, we already talked about with Franco, but somewhere like Portugal, it's not exclusively the EU. However, it did have a big part in it. But again, if there was some sort of trade deal, some sort of like the EEF, for example, the EAF, sorry if I'm getting those acronyms wrong, that Norway is a part of, although they're not a part of the EU, for example. But who knows? We'll see.
The Soviet Union would still have fallen in this world just due to the sheer greater degree of incompetency than the United States. Afterwards, with less concentration of German capital, the Germans would not have been the key economic influence and investment they were in Eastern Europe in our timeline. Eastern European countries like Poland and the Baltics would still have seen large economic growth, due to having good fundamentals like a skilled labor force and institutions, but they'd probably have seen several harsh waves of recessions and economic collapses, with slower total progress. Similarly, without the European Union, Poland with the backing of the US would become the main linchpin of anti-Russian defense, with Poland building an economic and military system across the former Warsaw Pact nations. There's no way that as the decades passed, Germany would become pacified and the Russians would stop being a threat, the German Federation wouldn't become more and more of a real organization.
So I guess then the unification of Germany in this timeline would sort of be the tearing down of borders, but not a true unification. I mean, I think, and this is fine to say. I think eventually Hanover, Hessen, and Bavaria they would have united anyways. But okay, so Germany would then be reunited, but still be divided in that manner. All right, we'll go with that just because that's the point of the video here.
In the new Europe in which war was no longer a threat, or the raison d'etre for the divided Germany, there seems to be no reason why Germany wouldn't in real terms become more unified. In total, this Europe's a strange place. It's far more similar to how Europe's been across its whole history, with lots of different power blocks and divided between British, French, and Polish spheres of influence. The European continent would probably be under American influence, since the Europeans would
I like how he doesn't even touch the Balkans.
trust the U.S. more than their own European
Except for Romania
neighbors.
there.
Whatifalthist, and thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that video, please like, comment.
Cool. So once again, another Altist video. Somehow it manages to bash Canada in it. This one was, I think, a little bit longer than the Alternative History Hub one, but cool take. Don't really know if I agree with those last 3 minutes there. Those were some pretty bold conclusions. But who knows? That's just what, and this is what we like about Whatifalthist. This is what I like about Whatifalthist, is that he makes very bold conclusions. Anyways, so that was that. That was sort of the second part, as I said. Hope you guys liked it. Let me know what you think. What if Germany was divided? Did you prefer the Morgenthau plan? I hope you didn't, because it would lead to many people starving. But do you think the Morgenthau plan may have worked out? Do you think the Roosevelt plan might have maybe even been better than the current plan that we had now? Well, that happened in our timeline, so to say, the split between East and West. And what events do you think would have been different? Maybe, whereas Whatifalthist, he said the Soviet Union would fall, maybe the Soviet Union didn't fall. And if you made it to the end of the video, thank you very much. I appreciate you. Only about 30% of you do. So if you made it all the way, congratulations. You're one of the best 30%. Thank you all very much. We'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye. Great day. Take care.